Today we're going to be talking about teenage angst. Yay! Hey everyone, I'm V for Verbatim, and my thumbnails need a lot of work. I just don't have enough hours in the day to make them pretty and clickable, I'm sorry. But today is another OC character breakdown, this one being one of my favorite characters. I'm pretty sure I've said that about pretty much all of my old paper horcruxes, but this guy is pretty high up there. Or more accurately, this girl, because up until this year of revisiting the character, Robin Jennings was a girl. I don't remember why the shift happened exactly, but Robin is a dude now, which makes a whole lot of characters gayer by relation. Robin was one of the characters to have the most romance-based side stories, from her relationship with an asylum patient to her casual flirtings with angels and demons and the literal master of time himself. She attracts people in high places despite her meager upbringings, and boy are they meager and just a mess. The character we're going to be talking about today was rooted in my understanding of emo culture as a child, but hopefully has grown up into much more than that. Well, enough with the vague and awful intro, let's start talking about the Prince of Darkness, the scrappy and hungry, the man, the myth, the legend, Robin Jennings, or, as of rewriting this story, Romeo Starling, the Midnight Sparrow. Romeo was the third character I created back in 2012, and was the first character I wrote the conventional OC bio for. Basically, Robin's dad was probably dead, and her biggest conflict was that she didn't know how to use her ambiguous shadow powers. Shadow and dark are used redundantly in this original bio, by the way. But she became superhuman because she was hit by a meteor from the Shadow Realm. She's changed a lot over the course of her iterations. First she was the Shadow, then Mist, then Shadow J. Sometimes she had long hair, sometimes braids, sometimes short hair. A lot of the time she would have hair over one eye. Sometimes she would become other people's shadows, sometimes she would control other people's shadows. Sometimes she could create shadow goo. You know what? I don't know, man. I really don't know. More importantly, she was my dumping ground for angst. Up until this rewrite, we were working with Robin Jennings Shadow J, the version of this character from 2017 to 2021. And let's go through her tragic backstory together, shall we? Abusive stepfather, mother cheated on actual father, father committed not die, mysterious super depression, is poor, older sister's tongue was cut out. So yeah, her backstory was something else. A lot of it is going to change. Anyway, Robin started as her own character but became a surrogate character for my friend in 6th grade. We ended up not being friends after a while because she kind of moved on to a new friend and I'm just an asshole, but you know what? A friend ghosting me and another dude leaving me hanging when I friend-zoned him never stopped me from making them into literal gods in my universe. So, I'm kind of a little bit tolerant of that kind of stuff. Robin's design was inspired by a few things, most notably Violet from The Incredibles, Raven, Dr. Facilier's Moving Shadows, Gwen from Total Drama for some reason, and basically every emo character ever created. Oh, and I guess she was kind of based on Katana from Beware the Batman for some reason. If I were to give her official periods of development, they would go like this. Elementary school was when she was a basic OC with shadow powers. In middle school, she was an emo girl. In high school, she was an emo sad girl with the power of tragedy, and also a secret agent, and also in love with an escaped asylum inmate. All of which we'll get into in this character's current story, in which he is now a dude. Again. So let's dive into this cesspool of an angst fest before I change my mind. So a lot of shit has to change pre-season 1, starting with Romeo's origins. Romeo Starling was one of the 4 original cast members born with superpowers, so he has a natural understanding of them and their limitations. He was still a child that grew up in poverty, but his mother and father were good people that struggled with a shared heroin addiction in their early lives. They were using before Romeo was born, and when he was born, he wasn't the healthiest and had some cognitive issues growing up. His parents got sober in order to care for him, but still struggled to hold down jobs because of their pasts. Romeo's father actually struggled with an early onset dementia before his passing, but Romeo and his father had a close bond throughout his life. Romeo, his older sister Autumn, and his younger brother Hunter all have their issues. Autumn is unable to speak and Hunter struggles with hyperactivity, so along with the expectation that he must support his family by getting jobs where he can, Robin is also relied on to look after Hunter, a job he happily accepts because he loves his siblings. Romeo himself has a form of schizophrenia, which is pretty intense for him. When his powers acted up for the first time when he was 8 years old, he wasn't even sure if it was all in his own head. He fell into the patterns of his parents, though, picking up smoking and occasionally drinking when it got especially difficult and stressful for him to differentiate reality from fiction. Despite his issues and those of his siblings, His family serves as a very functional support system for him, that actively encourages him to use his powers to protect the overly looked, impoverished neighborhood from gang violence. He's a seasoned hero by the time he joins the Heroes Rising team, being called the Midnight Sparrow by the people he protects rather than making up a name for himself. Romeo Season 1 is basically a rinse and repeat of him being told to lighten up until people realize he's going through some shit and they need to give him some space. He's initially introduced to Cassidy when she finds him hospitalized after an episode. Even though he accepts Cassidy's offer and comes to live with the team for a while, he doesn't think any of it's real at first, and team members step in to make sure he gets home safe whenever he leaves to be with his family. Specifically Eli Alvaro. Eli has extreme social anxiety, but he finds Romeo more approachable than anyone else since they're the only two guys on the team, and they become friends early on. As Romeo becomes more adjusted, he, another teammate named Alexa, and another named Becky Adams form this sort of mini-league in their team, and they do their own detective work. They're the most competent and brilliant members of their team, so they have a lot of moments across the series where they team up just to investigate things together. Of the original 8 members of the team, Romeo's the only one that's lived in Chicago his entire life. In the more dangerous parts of the city, no less. Romeo's pretty down-to-earth even when his mind isn't, and with his experience on the streets, he's one of the best resources they have on city culture. Over the season, Romeo's seen as the stick in the mud and watches in exasperation as all the toddlers on his team struggle to not be insane. But he lacks the confidence in himself and his own mind to actually offer suggestions or control the chaos. He's also good-looking enough to gain the attention of quite a few characters over Season 1, including Alexa, who ultimately doesn't pursue anything, Jackson Astral, a character who's so deep in the closet that he rationalized their flirty conversations as witty banter, a lord from the 1700s called Diabolos, a villain called Master Time who doesn't know how to process anything, and, most importantly to the next season, his yandere villain crush Reagan or Mastermind. Mind you, Romeo's oblivious to all of this, and is more the type to casually flirt with people to be friendly. Romeo's most significant episodes over the season are Requiem, where he cleans out his late father's old home and has to grieve the man for a second time, Phantom Con, where Eli, Olivia, and Romeo go to a comic horror convention and Romeo gets obsessed with anime, a quirk that comes up in later stories, and The Ghost and the Frost King, where Romeo travels back to the 1700s with Becky Adams and has to disguise himself as a woman because plot, and is probably the accidental gay awakening for one of the villains of the episode, Diabolos, since the guy flirts with and belittles him without realizing Romeo's a dude. Romeo destroys him and his misogynistic ass by the end though, and Romeo gets to be in the shoes of the rest of his primarily female hero allies by playing the role of a woman for an episode. So, breaking down gender norms in fun ways, I guess. Season 2 is Romeo's big moment to shine as a love interest to a more important character this season, Reagan, or Mastermind. Or more accurately, yandere love interest that has his own sad backstory that makes his murder and villainy completely okay. The whole season is about Reagan defecting from a team of villains when he pursues a relationship with Romeo in secret. His powers are his mind control and illusions, and with Romeo's brain out of alignment already with his hallucinations, Reagan's able to convince Romeo's mind that Reagan is actually a woman, and the two of them grow close because of the lie. When he's found out, Reagan is physically beaten by Lucan, or Master Time, his closest villain partner, because he also wanted to pursue Romeo. Yes, a love triangle that my poor sad boy Romeo didn't sign up for. In all seriousness, Romeo takes Reagan in to keep an eye on him, but they put a pause on romance in the face of the threat of the season. Lucan and the team of villains he was putting together in the shadows. Romeo spends most of the season either babysitting Reagan or trying to put his own team of heroes together by reuniting a few kids from his old neighborhood that are also gifted with natural-born powers, recruiting them and putting together another team of heroes to counteract the over 50 villains they are expected to face in the future. The project was the beginnings of an espionage agency called Cyanocida, and a revival of an old order of heroes that went by that name. The books they used to teach new recruits of their organization were the written works of a hero called Seraphim that Romeo actually met in the aforementioned Victorian-era drag episode. So Romeo's busy putting together a spin-off series and gradually catching feelings for the asylum patient Ray for most of the season. But because of the nature of Romeo's interactions throughout the season, his past experiences, his struggles with his mental health, the stigma surrounding recovering addicts, poverty, they're all really relevant and lead many discussions across the season, which is a major difference between him and the previously mentioned Azubah Black and Becky Adams. While those two are diverse on paper, those woker elements are, admittedly, way more superficial than Romeo's life as a mentally ill child of poverty shaping so many situations and decisions he comes across in his 4 seasons. Okay, let's go in reverse for a hot second here and completely forget about villain love triangles and Special Agent Midnight Sparrow over here. Romeo goes in a completely different direction in Season 3. It's basically the Eli show, and I'm so sorry, but Eli, Romeo, and several other members of the team go to space when they hear a distress signal from the Shadow Realm / Purgatorio. And that could be an entire separate video, I realize. But anyway, the ship is split into 5 pieces on the way, and Romeo and Eli are the only ones to actually make it to their destination when Eli, who has access to the realm itself, creates a rift in space so that the two of them don't get destroyed in the vacuum of space. Before you try to outsmart me, because you probably have, no, Eli couldn't just do that on Earth to save them all the trouble. He didn't actually know he could create a rift until his and Romeo's lives were put in danger. It's mostly a road trip where Eli learns about his powers and confronts this tentacle thing. But Romeo learns quite a bit about dimension hopping and how his powers fit into that. All in all, Romeo is just a background character here, but he fills the role he was always meant to play as the greatest best friend ever and the most competent character of the show, being the one to ground Eli throughout the process. Romeo Starling has an entire spin-off series by the time we come back to him 13 years later in Season 4, and I will be going more in depth with that once we come across the Cyanosuda retrospective series. He's managing his hallucinations as best as he can, and he and Reagan from Season 2 are officially together, handing off Cyanosuda to younger blood and reopening the asylum that Reagan was held in for years, with hopes of never forcing trauma upon its patients as it did for Reagan. Over the season, the two investigate a troubling mind virus that seems to be infecting the youth of Chicago. They're forced to don their hero roles one last time when they have to protect their patients from hundreds of zombified people outside the hospital. They're able to reach Cassidy and the rest of the team with information about demon blood transfusions being the connection behind the cases. But with the hospital being overrun, Romeo is forced to create an opening into the dream dimension so that he, Reagan, and the uninfected patients will be safe for the time being. Their information leads to the creation of a cure, and when it's finally safe enough for them to return, they're able to rebuild their hospital and finally retire from their work as heroes. Romeo, like Becky, was a hero for a long time, so I think it kind of makes sense that he had less screen time in the final series and is mostly happy. Plus, he has a whole mini-series where he can grouch about those darn kids that he has to teach. Romeo, unlike Becky, doesn't ever have any kids, but he does raise his younger brother, Hunter, like he is his own child, and he and Reagan stay together for the rest of their lives. Romeo Starling is 16 years old at the start of the series, and he ends the series at age 31. He's 5'4", being pretty short compared to the rest of the team. He's fully human as well, being half black and half Asian, probably Japanese. You'll notice that most of the characters are mixed race, so I guess my subconscious had an idea in mind. As I mentioned, he has a sister, a brother, and had 2 loving parents until his father passed away early on. Fun fact about him, his hero name, the Midnight Sparrow, is based on a black sparrow yokai that usually traveled in flocks and would prelude some kind of misfortune or otherwise indicates the presence of another yokai nearby. I took that and the morbid and weirdly romanticized concept of the Hanahaki disease as inspiration for his new abilities. I would have made Romeo half Korean since my old friend was Korean, but seeing as I happen to have specific Japanese influences in mind for his character and design, I didn't want to make it weird by having him match up with concepts that don't match up with his culture. Though I promise if I have another Asian character coming up, I won't make them Japanese, I promise. It's getting ridiculous now anyway. His birthday is July 24th, 2027. He's a cisgender male character, but he is bisexual. He has plenty of male suitors at the start of the series that he's oblivious to, but a lot of his flirtier moments are with female characters across the series. I don't see him as being particularly religious. Oh, and as I'd established before, he does have schizophrenia, which is a real issue for him, especially because of his power set. Romeo is so interwoven into the plot of this series that I'll have to run through highlights of his relationships pretty quickly here. He loves his parents, they're always there for him even if they have high expectations for him and are busy a lot of the time. They do their best given their circumstances and they do try to discourage Romeo from developing his own addictions later in life. Romeo and his father were particularly close, almost acting like twins since Romeo's parents were still pretty young when they had him. Romeo loves his sister Autumn to death, and despite her inability to talk, he never tries to talk for her. They have a great understanding for each other in that Romeo doesn't need her to write out her thoughts or sign to understand her. When she started to transition and came out to Romeo, he helped her feel more comfortable about it, and the two are just generally very loving towards each other. Romeo and his younger brother Hunter are 12 years apart, so Romeo treats Hunter like his own son, someone so precious to him that he puts Hunter before himself at all times. There's a bunch of individual kids, but Romeo's closest to a kid named Arjun. and is a little less cordial with some of the others, especially triplets named Jade, Jules, and Jada. A few of them think he sees himself as above his past on the streets now that he's a famous superhero. They're worried he's no longer in it for the little guys like he was before, or in it for them, so that tests their relationship quite a bit. Eli is Romeo's best friend on his hero team. The two bond over being the only two guys on their team at first, but the relationship evolves into them grounding each other when they have their moments. Romeo lets Eli talk his anxieties out but doesn't let him get consumed by them. Eli makes an effort not to acknowledge Romeo's delusions even when Romeo brings them up, mostly so that Romeo realizes it's all in his head. They also both become huge horror and anime nerds and bond over their obsession with that sort of thing. They're just really close, healthy friends. Romeo does tend to be a little more relaxed and flirty around Eli though. He either calls him man or love depending on how relaxed he is, but he has no romantic attraction to Eli. Jackson Astral and Romeo only interact over the course of the first season, but Jackson's an older hero that grew up with special privileges by being a literal god. The two of them were child superheroes from very different circumstances. Romeo bickers with Jackson while Jackson plays up the charm and screws with him whenever they interact. Though it's not outright stated, Romeo is probably attracted to Jackson while Jackson is, but refuses to pursue anything. Unfortunately, Jackson dies the same year, so the relationship doesn't go far beyond casual flirting and old married couple style play fights. I'd say the relationship could have been even better than Ray and Romeo honestly, but it was at least an indication that Romeo has a thing for redheads. This love triangle is annoying the longer I think about it. Ray is just this positive ball of energy, even if he is a little insane, and he encourages Romeo to smile more just by being himself. It's a fluffy sort of relationship. Lucan, by contrast, just likes Romeo for his sarcasm, his dark humor, and his bluntness, preferring the more emotionalist side to Romeo that he himself can relate to. Had Romeo ended up with Lucan, he probably would have been more miserable in the end since that was the side to him that Lucan preferred. Romeo and Alexa were particularly teasing towards each other, and seeing as they're both bi as hell, they root for each other and their romantic pursuits, even if they are a little affectionate for each other as well. They're playful and both appreciative of how sensible the other can be when the time calls for it. Romeo's powers come from the dream dimension and the void simultaneously. You see, Romeo's dreams are pretty unsavory. He sees images of birds constantly in his dreams, sometimes eating him alive, sometimes turning inside out, that kind of freaky, unnerving stuff. Dreams are their own reality, but with repeat dreams of the same twisted imagery, the birds became more and more real until they eventually passed from the dream dimension into our reality, but were visually corrupted by passing through the void first. Hence, they have the properties characteristic of the void and the dream dimension. He must act as a conduit through which excess energy from the inner lap of dimensions can release, meaning the birds that he sees in his dreams have no option but to escape into the living realm through his body. At first, he would be forced to cough up the birds, but it was very slow and painful. Overflow of the nightmares caused later birds to escape into the reality through his eyes, through reflections of him in the mirrors, and through his own shadow. With years of practice, he's learned to control the overflow, but he still struggles with the pain of their escape sometimes. Once in the living worlds, the shadow birds are easily destroyed by light, so they stick to the shadows of other people or Romeo himself, depending on what Romeo needs them to do. The birds are an extension of Romeo, so until they dissipate from sunlight, Romeo can track them or can otherwise use them like any other flock of birds, having them attack villains or surround them to prevent them from escaping. He can even make masses of them surround him to give him the ability to float. Being less of a heavy hitter and more of a surveillance and stealth missions expert, Romeo's the only member of the team to actively use a gun, since most of the other characters either refuse to hold a gun, they don't know how to, or they have powers that are useful enough that they wouldn't ever need one. Later on, he's able to transform the shadows of others into shadows and images of their dreams, and he sort of becomes a human boogeyman by creating the nightmares of his allies and enemies to use as psychological weapons. Like I said before, Romeo becomes a weeb by the end of season 1. He's always looking for a new comic to read, and he physically can't do anything when he's stuck on a cliffhanger in a series. He also tends to be the sarcastic one of the group to the point where he can be unlikably snarky without meaning to. He devolves into negativity and self-doubt whenever he doesn't measure up to everyone else. Like, constantly. Typically, he overanalyzes problems, the exception being, ironically, in situations where everyone else overanalyzes. In the show itself, I'd have it so that he coughs up black feathers whenever he's startled, maybe his room is covered in feathers as well, and of course have it so bird sound effects accompany his reactions like Azaba and the wolf imagery. He'd probably be the most visually interesting in a fight, since he uses his shadow so often in combat. It would also probably be hell to animate. Romeo, unlike the others, is simple enough in his role in the story. He's kind of a less intense version of Azaba, calling out people for their bullshit and being the one grounded character among literal gods. He's larger than life, but in a humble way. He's a brilliant man and a powerful hero, but he doesn't use that prowess to bring people down or explain away things when he's in the wrong. Which is likely why he, more so than the larger personalities of his team, is so attractive to others, honestly. He's a logical wet blanket and a romantic MacGuffin, which admittedly is a very weird combination. Just as Violet Jones was an Incredibles ripoff and Robin Jennings was a Tumblr ripoff, Romeo Starling is anything but original. Even while writing, I realized some elements of his design reminded me of Ryuk from Death Note, some things reminded me of Batman, that sort of thing, you know? Robin is far from an original idea, to be honest. There are plenty of heroes that aren't rich like Iron Man, plenty that aren't as simple-minded as Superman, but for me, Romeo Starling is one of the first, and if you guys on YouTube will have me, hopefully not the last. Romeo Starling may not be a name that means anything to normal people right now, but if I can learn to keep evolving and changing characters beyond what I considered sacred as a child, and maybe leave some of the teenage angst behind, maybe characters like Starling can one day become poster children, and characters like Azabeth Blacks could become fan favorites. I just have to keep writing, keep creating, and keep changing, and maybe the characters I care so much about might mean something one day. Anyway, that's going to be it for today, but here's the completed drawing on screen. And yeah, if you couldn't tell for the last bit of recording, I was sick, and the day before I recorded that first bit, I crashed my moped at 3 in the morning. But you know what? Just because my foot felt like shit didn't mean I couldn't record, and I got through the whole video. So you know what? I was at least productive. Anyway, thanks for listening, thanks for being here. I hope you're doing well today, or I hope things are going well for you, at least in one area of your life. And as always, this is V for Verbatim signing off until the next video, unless you want to stick around for the intro bit that I never got around to adding to the intro. But if this is you heading out, take care and be excellent to each other. Bye. Green Day, MCR, all-time low and yellow card. Hello from the other side, Black Parade's a wild ride. Thanks for the memories, this is love and this is me. Driver's license, gasoline, Miley Cyrus, Disney Queen. Young blood, Fall Out Boy, set it off's my background noise. Zombie covers in my head, guess I'll sleep when I am dead. Nickelback to Nightcore, music fans in uproar. Broadway ballads, plots and more, I can't take it anymore. Teenager pity party. Internet devotion to the pulse and motion. Teenager pity party. Or romanticization, where's the conversation?